Welcome to Living Well with MS, the podcast from Overcoming MS for people with multiple sclerosis interested in making healthy lifestyle choices. I'm your host, Jeff Alex. Thank you for joining us for this new episode. I hope it makes you feel more informed and inspired about living a full life with MS. Don't forget to check out our show notes for more information and useful links. You can find these on our website at overcomingms.org/podcast. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about us on your social media channels. That's the kind of viral effect we can all smile about. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Now, without further ado, on with the show. Joining us today is Mark Webb. Mark is Head of Communications at Shift.ms, as well as being a player of wheelchair rugby amongst many fundraising feats. You can find out more about Mark at onemanandhiscatheters.com. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to the show, but can you tell us, our audience, a little bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. So I'm Mark. I have progressive MS, secondary progressive. So I've had many years with the remitting MS. I'm slightly over 50. Happily married for 21 years with 2 teenage children.
I'm slightly under 50, but that won't last very long. I'm about a month away.
I'm embracing my age. It's fine.
This is a very bizarre thing and not the topic of the podcast, but so my father had MS and he died at 54, so there's a bit of a milestone that I'm
yes.
I'm kind of thinking I definitely want to get past that. You're affiliated with Shift.ms, so could you tell us a bit about Shift.ms? I must say Shift.ms. I know I keep nearly saying Shift.ms, yes. But Shift.ms. And can you tell us a bit about Shift.ms and what they do?
Yes, so Shift.ms is it's officially a charity, and it is a charity, but it's a very quirky and edgy one. It was founded by a guy called George Pepper and his best friend Freddie, and George was diagnosed with MS in the typical age range, his 20s, I think, maybe around 30, but found that all the traditional channels were leading him down to talk to older people or people with more advanced MS. He really didn't find a community that he could share his experiences, ask questions, answer questions, explore what was going on in his life and his head, so to speak. So he founded Shift.ms 11 years ago, and it started out really as a social network. Well, it is a social network for MSers, so founded by MSers for MSers, and it's the place where you can go to chat, to ask questions, to have those discussions about, I've got a tingly feeling in my left little toe. Anybody else experience that? And inevitably, given there's nearly 40,000 members, somebody else will chime in and say, oh, yes, I've got that, but it's actually on my left toe or whatever. And it's just a brilliant, supportive, positive community. And that's what it's remained, and that's what it's grown. It's UK-based. George lives in Leeds. We've got offices in Leeds and London. But actually, it's a worldwide movement now. Given its English language, naturally, we have loads of users in the US, Canada, for example. But with the magic of Google Translate, etc., it's truly global. Alongside the social network, which is kind of the core, the couple of other things Shift.ms does really well is produce some amazing films, which really try to help explain and make sense of what's the unexplainable, really. What's the word? Inexplicable. When I say bad words, I can just blame my MS for my cog fog, my brain mess.
My wife does point out that I used to be like this before. Sometimes.
Yes, well, yeah, I know, but now we get the excuses, don't we? And it's wonderful. One of the few gifts of MS is that you can blame so much on your blooming disease. But yes, Shift.ms produces absolutely wonderful films, and I would probably point to the first and the last as ones to look up on YouTube. The first they made, and my favourite still, is Gallop, which is about a chap going through the process of diagnosis and not understanding it, getting a bit scared, getting a bit angry, getting confused, etc., wrapped up in a bit of a love story. And that is a wonderful, very moving video. And the very latest one is called Sidecar. Very edgy. It's about motorbike racing. And one of the people in there is going through the process of moving from having normal MS, let's call it, to going progressive. And you can see the emotions and the humor in it and the edginess of it is just fantastic. So Gallop and Sidecar are two of many films, but they're both just brilliant.
Yeah, Sidecar's my favourite one. Really
absolutely.
And you've got like, I was going to say proper actors, but recognisable. Quite high profile actors in there.
Yeah, so the lady in Gallop, so the co-star in Gallop, she went on to be, I hope I'm right in saying she was in Hollyoaks, so we got to her just before she broke into higher level acting. But the production quality is just immense, and we're always winning awards left, right and centre. And then the third thing that Shift.ms does is a lovely series of encounters with experts in their fields, neurologists, MS nurses, counsellors in nutrition, counsellors in exercise, in sexual issues, etc., etc. It's just rebranding, but it's been called MS Reporters. And it uses MSers from our community who are trained up to interview, and they get to talk to the experts across the world. And we post those on YouTube. And we as MSers get, half an hour with a neurologist every so often, maybe the same with an MS nurse, depending on where we are. And if we're lucky, we might have counselling, we might have physio, whatever. But what you've got on YouTube is an immensely rich library of us, MSers, talking to the gurus out there. And it's been particularly helpful during lockdown and during the pandemic, because, of course, on the day the pandemic broke, we just didn't know exactly what the impact would be on MSers in terms of risk profile and everything else. So to hear from the experts giving us some idea of what they thought, and then through the process telling us more and more as they knew and as they understood stuff and as data came through. And most of it was very reassuring, but you could find that information that really would be very difficult to get through your GP, because, a GP is not likely to understand the intricacies of multiple sclerosis.
And what's your personal mission and motivation to help the MS community?
That's a very big question for me. They talk about the 5 stages of grief, don't they? And I've been there. I was diagnosed in 2007. Looking back, I had MS since 1992. But it took me a while. I can remember the time I said, when I asked a Costa Coffee girl to carry my coffee, and I said, I'm partially disabled. So could you carry my coffee? I really couldn't bear saying the word disabled about myself. That's a good few years ago now, and now I'm proud to be disabled. I've got a voice. I worked in comms all my life and graduated into social media, so I've got a powerful voice, and I use it to speak up for the MS community, to speak up for the disabled community. And because I'm on lots of speaker platforms, I speak very, I work very hard at diversity and inclusion as a topic because ethnicity, gender, sexuality, they're all very deserving parts of the diversity conversation. Actually, the biggest minority in D&I, diversity and inclusion, is the disabled community, and we're often the last one represented. So I've kind of added that to my portfolio of shoutiness. And in terms of shoutiness, I'm not one to chain myself to gates outside number 10. I prefer the happy chappy in a wheelchair. So it's I can get angry, but generally it's humor and engagement is my way of bringing the community to light.
And in terms of your MS, how has that impacted your life?
My MS is pretty advanced now, so I can still walk a few yards on a good day with a rollator. I have a wheelchair that I use to get around the house when I was going to say too lazy, but also too tired to walk. I have a funky wheelchair, a motorized wheelchair to have more adventures that can get me off-road, etc. I've been catheterizing for quite a while, self-catheterizing for quite a while, and just last year I had a suprapubic catheter inserted, so I've now got a direct tube into my tummy and a bag that can empty out, and that's not pleasant, but actually a bit of a relief because I can now hydrate at last, whereas when you have leaky bits, you tend to not drink enough, and that can lead to its own problems. So it impacts pretty much every aspect of my life. I have a carer. I still work. I tweet furiously from my bed in the mornings. But it's pretty all-encompassing now. But that's fine.
Just on the catheterization, there was a YouTube, his latest YouTube video from Aaron Boster, who I'm sure you're aware, and he said that MS symptoms, more than anything else, more than relapses or anything else, are caused by urinary tract infections.
Yeah.
And
yes. Yes.
And you were saying about drinking enough, because I think one of the most common symptoms is sort of bladder issues, and then obviously then you start to drink less, and then you get dehydrated, then you get more UTIs. And he was saying literally, and I haven't spoken to him about this, but literally more than relapses, symptoms are caused by urinary tract infections, which I found extraordinary.
It doesn't. I have it particularly bad. When I get it bad, I get a very high fever, and one of my key symptoms, one of my main symptoms is spasms, luckily confined to nighttime. But when I have a fever, my left-hand side, which is the worst, both sides are bad now, but my left side is far worse, it goes from spasms into absolute painful paralysis. So by the time I get to hospital, I'm blue lighted to hospital. I can hear all the medics going, sepsis, sepsis. So they're all looking out for sepsis markers. And I'm glad sepsis is now a recognized thing, because that's a huge killer, and it's a killer of people with MS. And by the time I'm in hospital, within a few minutes, I'm on morphine because the amount of pain my paralysis is giving me. So I have UTIs bad. It's not pleasant.
And one of the key things to stop them is drinking lots and lots and lots of water. So
there you go.
Yeah. This isn't on video, but Mark's now drinking
yes.
some water.
I'm constantly. There's the advantage. Self-catheterizing, there's a little bit of effort involved. I now have a bag, so I can drink. It'll pull through into a bag, which I empty at some point. So I flood my body now with water.
Yeah. Exercise is one of the key things. I think I would encourage people to follow you on Twitter, because it's it's interesting and entertaining as well. So there's a lot of you get a lot of information, but also you'll get a lot of humour as well of the antics that you get up to, if I put it that way. And so from that, it's clear that exercise is very important to you. And I know that you were active in wheelchair rugby. That's not were because of anything to do with your condition, but because of coronavirus, we can't play team sports. So could you tell us a bit about wheelchair rugby and your general sporting endeavours?
Yes, so once upon a time, I was a very active, let's call it real rugby player, captain of a good school, county player, blah, 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 all the things you like to show off about when you were little, which is now hundreds of years ago. So I was an active rugby player. I'm still an active armchair rugby supporter. And fast forward through my career, I was a ski rep for a couple of years. I spent 3 years of head of communications for David Lloyd Leisure, which is a health and fitness group. So I was in spinning classes. I was doing a triathlon every year, retrospectively stumbling on my left foot every time I was running round, but I hadn't been diagnosed. So I was always active. I was then diagnosed in 2007 at a time when really I don't think it was that understood, and certainly not broadcast, that you should keep exercising. So my activities drowned out to close to zero while I processed being diagnosed, and I didn't exercise, and that's a big regret of mine. But nobody told me to, so I've got to get over it. I then took up physio, and I was doing some basic exercises at my fantastic local MS centre, learning how to look after my body a bit better, but then discovered wheelchair rugby as part of a nagging from my physio at the time. She also worked in a spinal injury ward for the NHS as one of her sort of portfolio of physio jobs, and was used to encouraging people who'd experienced spinal issues to get into wheelchair rugby. It took ages to, 6 months, 9 months of her nagging me. And I just wish I'd gone earlier because it's absolutely fantastic. I am up against, it's a mixed gender sport, so males and females. I am comfortably the worst player. And I'm fine about that. In the sense that often you're up against somebody who's had a car accident, so lost, a lower limb problems, or they've been in Afghanistan and lost a leg, or they've got relatively mild cerebral palsy. So I'm up against beefcakes who bomb around the court. But the beauty of wheelchair rugby is that it's very welcoming. And because it's on a point system, you're allowed a certain amount of ability on the court at any one time. You've got the superstars, but you also need the little tootlers like myself to make up the numbers. But I more than make up the numbers because there are speedy wheelchairs to score the tries, but there are also different shaped wheelchairs with sort of metal frontage to them that get in the way of those beefcakes, and I'm a getter in the wayer of the fast guys and girls, and I absolutely love it. So it's weird. I wish I didn't have MS, but I'm 52 and I'm playing a contact sport, and I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't have MS.
And has it helped you build your strength and confidence playing rugby?
My confidence has never really been an issue, but in terms of strength, absolutely. So I can feel myself getting a little bit weaker in lockdown. I still exercise out on the patio. I think I've done about 25 kilometers up and down a patio. in lockdown. And while we've all been talking about binge watching Netflix and what's next on telly, I do the same, but I do that lying in bed with some weights, just casually lifting weights. And again, I'm just closing in on 150 tons bicep curled. That's balanced towards my strong right-hand side, but I push my bad left-hand side as well. And so I can actually see in the bits of my body that are working, I've actually got some growing muscles. And that's really weird. When you've got a progressive disease, you know you're, in a sense, going downhill. You don't know how downhill that graph is. It's not always straightforward. Progressively, it's kind of, mine seems to have slowed down since I was highly active when I had relapsing remitting. But to see a couple of my muscles actually looking quite good is a wonderful feeling. And no skin off my nose when I'm watching The Crown or whatever and just sitting there lifting weights. So it's wonderful, but also the team ethic. I've broadened my horizons way beyond multiple sclerosis a long time ago, but to actually have that camaraderie with a bunch of a dozen or so people with very different conditions, and we don't even talk about those conditions. There's 2 or 3, I'm not quite sure what's wrong with them, because it doesn't matter. We just get onto the court and bash into each other.
Yeah, I did some sessions with my neurophysio, and it very good actually. They had some like weekly gym sessions, and you can see everyone starts like eyeing each other up because they don't say what condition you've got, and you after a while you kind of work it out, and then you sort of say, have you got MS? And they're like, yeah, I was wondering about you as well. And it's like, okay, yeah, because just from the symptoms I can kind of see. I mean, the thing with MS, obviously they're different for everyone, but there are some things you think, okay,
some shared.
It was quite interesting because actually one person had very similar symptoms, had been in a car crash, and she was a keen cyclist and was hit while on her bike, and
Eek.
yeah, and it's because it caused a sort of brain injury, and she had very similar symptoms, bizarrely. But yeah, she had other issues, which is she wants to get back to her bike, but had a real fear problem as well. But anyway, I wanted to ask as well, so people who might have mobility issues, what advice would you give them about getting more active?
I think the most simple answer is do. It's so easy to just let go. I have quite severe chronic fatigue as well, and it's relatively easy to give in. And I think there are times when you do need to give in. You do need to accept that today's not your day or this hour's not your hour. But I really believe in pushing yourself. I think we all need different motivations, don't we? So for me, wheelchair rugby has driven me on to push myself even when I'm not in training, so with the team, so that there is that motivation I get. But also, if you have a local MS centre, or if you can access physio through the NHS or whatever is the equivalent in your country, that is also a motivator for me, is being nagged by a physio and understanding that I've got, lazy can be the right word in the sense that not that you're not trying, but sometimes you're getting into bad habits. And to have a physio just take a look at the way you're hobbling or walking or transferring from chair to wheelchair, from bed to upright, all those things where you're developing bad habits. Lazy is an unfair word, but I think it makes sense, is if you've got somebody who can look at your body and the way you're using your body or misusing your body, I think that's very key. So I think just staying active is absolutely key, whilst at the same time respecting that you've got a bugger of a disease that is going to prevent you from ever representing England on the rugby field ever again.
And on inclusivity and accessibility, what's your view on how the diversity of symptoms that people have got, and how diversity in the MS community is treated?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So we are, we call it the snowflake disease because not one of us has the same exact path or exact collection of portfolio of symptoms as the other, or severity of them, or whatever. So there's funny times. So I think when we are diagnosed, I personally, for example, sort of not shut down in any depressed sense, but I just didn't really want to know. So denial, I think, was my key way of treating my MS early on when I was diagnosed. There's others who are going to be profoundly knocked sideways and depressed or anxious or those kind of words. There's others going to be wanting answers and determined to sort their life out, etc. So there's that time. And that's one of the reasons I value Shift.ms and the way it can help people, but also my local MS centre, meeting with other people. So that's a funny time for people with MS. I think you then get to let's call it the middle phase, when you do develop an understanding. Hopefully you develop a network of friends and family. We all know that we lose friends who can't really cope with the fact we're not quite what we used to be, but I don't mind that because you find the special people. And then we get to this progressive disease, and I think there's a good few people who feel neglected at that stage because of science. We're a minority within a minority. I think, is it 15%-ish of people have primary progressive MS? That's the MS that instantly just starts going downhill at varied paces, but hasn't got many drugs to treat that, to slow progression. And likewise, secondary progressive, which is what I've got. So I've had the relapsing remitting MS for years, but at some point 2 or 3 years ago, I edged my way into progressive MS. And at that point, you're going to go into your neurologist, and partly it's going to be a, hi, how are you? Great, fine, thanks, bye, tick box. And I've always had good neurologists, but at the same time, you're slightly on the scrap heap. There are drugs coming online now, but that would be, I think it's the challenge. I'm not upset about that. It's just the way science is, and it's a more complex disease to treat, and so on and so on. And I'm afraid in pharmaceutical terms, it's probably not quite as profitable to push for those kind of drugs. So I'm really glad I'm on a trial with a statin drug, which is, I think statistically slows down, if it works, progress of my illness by sort of 20 to 30% or something. So things are happening, but we are slightly marginalized when we're that ill. But that's the way it is, and that's one of the reasons I need to keep speaking up.
And do you think the MS community could be more inclusive? Not the neurologists, but the actual groups of people with MS, like the likes of Shift.ms and Overcoming MS and MS Society and all these things?
I think they could, but at the same time, I think it's challenging to cater for all of us. Of course, we are all catered for. There is in the UK. There's the MS Society. There's the MS Trust. There's Shift.ms, which is global, and of course the MS Society is global. Overcoming MS is global. So there is so much out there, but I think sometimes the information and the support is out there, but I think sometimes it does fall back down to us to find our community, and that does graduate through time. So like I said, I had that denial phase when I didn't really want to talk to anybody with MS, and much as though I was never judgmental about disability, while I understood that a wheelchair might be my future, I just for a while did not want to see people in wheelchairs. I was, could I say repulsed? I probably was for a while, because I feared them all of a sudden. Nobody imagines they're going to be in a wheelchair. Now I'm in it, I'm absolutely fine with it. But just that thought of a wheelchair was a bit scary. It was very scary. It's actually liberating when you give in, so to speak, and get in a wheelchair. But there are communities out there and support networks. Could drugs companies do more for us? Could neurologists do more for us? Maybe, yes, but it's a complex disease. So I, in a sense, while I do campaign, I'm not campaigning to get myself cured or vaccinated or whatever. I want understanding from the disabled community, from the world, about disability, about multiple sclerosis. But also I have children, and I'm playing the long game. So I will keep pushing, because I know that statistically my children have a chance of getting MS. Not huge chance, but I'm afraid a good chance. So even if I'm embuggered by my MS, I think more about the next generation and grandchildren, if I have them. It's getting better all the time, and that's why I keep pushing on. You asked me about my purpose. I think that's the important thing. I want to win the lottery. I want to be cured, etc., etc. It ain't going to happen, neither of those. Well, particularly because I don't play the lottery. But there will be better treatments down the line, and there will be better understanding down the line. And that's what I want to leave as a legacy. I plan to hang around, but I'm playing the long game for the disabled community, for diversity, for the MS community.
So you're obviously very busy. We talked about the sport and everything. One of the other things you do is public speaking and TED Talks. So what sort of things do you present on those?
Yes, so actually, funnily enough, because I twaddle away on, particularly on Twitter and LinkedIn, I play a little bit with Instagram as well. I tend to get invited to stuff to speak, and I tend to be on diversity panels more often than not. So I'm usually with, LGBT person, somebody from an ethnic, a different ethnic background to, white UK, so to speak, and gender. I say we're the largest minority. Actually, girls are 49% of the population, aren't they? So actually, specifically, there's so much progress to be done there. So I'm on there, and I've talked about myself as the happy chappy in the wheelchair, and I can usually tell that I have the most powerful impact on people just talking about the disabled community. So it's often about diversity and inclusion. I talk about, it's a bit of a funky word that's only come out recently, but employee advocacy. As in talking up employers. I was diagnosed during my time working for Dixon's Carphone, which are the guys in the UK that own Currys, PC World, Carphone Warehouse, a bit like Best Buy in the US, and Dixon's owns companies across Europe, Kotsovlos in Greece, it's called, and Elkshop in Norway, etc., etc. So a very large organization, and one that with 38,000 employees, you wouldn't really expect to have treated an individual with a weird disease so well as they did. So I was diagnosed in my time with Dixon's, and then progressed quite badly in my time with Dixon's. And at every step of the way, they were brilliant with me. And it's 3 years since I left them, and I'm still speaking about them. So I talk about how the value of looking after somebody who's going through issues. It doesn't have to be MS, it doesn't have to be disability, it might be illness, it could be a cancer diagnosis, it could be grief from, family members or whatever. But looking after somebody at the more difficult phases in their life can have huge payoffs. So Dixon's looked after me wonderfully, but they don't owe me diddly squat, and yet I'm talking them up still. I'm talking at the Retail Week. Retail Week is something of a Bible for anybody in retail, which is having a tough time at the moment. But I'm on a panel in the next couple of months talking up Dixon's, unpaid, whatever, just because they were absolutely brilliant with me. And they could have given me what I call the guilty check. There, Mark, off you go, have a couple of quid, thanks very much, you're a lovely man, bye-bye. And they didn't. They adapted, worked with me to adapt my job that would also work for them. So win-win situation, because it wasn't just go away and we'll give you a photocopying job. It was, we evolved a job where I had been in active PR and communications in London with journalists into a social media job, which meant I could work from home or from my desk, still talk to the same journalist I was communicating with, but still benefit the company. And it was a wonderfully imaginative approach to dealing with a very serious illness. And in the league table of MSers, I've probably got a fairly, not the worst hand, but I've got a fairly bad hand. And they were just brilliant with me. So diversity, employee advocacy, and then really just disability. I am the guy who can still live a good life despite what my body's doing to me.
And as a final question, 2020 was obviously a pretty tough year for everyone. So what are you hopeful about in 2021?
2021. Well, I'm hopeful of a nice spring and summer. It's wonderful. As we talk, we've just got to the point where sundown is after 5 p.m. And I think for a lot of people, this last lockdown has possibly been the toughest because it was during the winter. I've actually found it the easiest because there's those vaccines around the corner. There is summer around the corner. There's a better understanding of the illness. So I hope for a return to normal or normal-ish. I'm very excited about getting back to wheelchair rugby. I've been fundraising in lockdown, doing a virathlon, which is just doing a variety of exercises. And I've raised something like £5,000 for Shift.ms. So really happy about that. But I need to do something else silly. And a couple of years ago, I did a Tough Mudder, where I was essentially a sack of potatoes being chucked over and under obstacles because I haven't got any strength to do any of the obstacles. And Tough Mudder would rather like me to come back. So I may be, if the world does open up, as we all hope, I may be doing another Tough Mudder for the sake of being silly. But I think, and I hope, the biggest benefit to the disabled community out of what's been a really tough time is that people understand the value and the ease of flexible working, is that people can productively and professionally and reliably and trustworthily, is that a word? Trustworthily work from home. So that lots of people with MS can carry on working a full-time job in the office, etc., etc. But there's lots of us who can still benefit the professional community, but just can't run the traditional office life or hours. So I'm hoping, I'm not 100% confident, but I'm hoping that there's an understanding that working from home, working flexibly is a way forward that works for companies, but also works for the disabled, the chronically ill, the chronically fatigued, to still keep giving back to community. You know, there's certain publications in the UK, but I'm sure elsewhere in the world that would have us positioned as scroungers. And there's data out there that just shows absolutely it's only a tiny minority that are these scroungers, and there are an awful lot more who are desperate to do stuff, work or exercise or volunteering, and just haven't been able to because the world's not set up for them like that. So I'm hoping there's a little bit more accessibility, flexibility, creativity around the edges of a world that's really not set up for disabled people.
Thank you very much for that. And I'd just like to thank you for joining us and encourage any listeners to check you out on Twitter and have a read of your blog at onemanandhiscatheters.com. And thank you for joining us, Mark Webb.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find all sorts of useful links and bonus information there. Do you have questions about this episode or ideas about future ones? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Living Well with MS is kindly supported by a grant from the Happy Charitable Trust. If you'd like to support the Overcoming MS charity and help keep our podcast advertising free, you can donate online at overcomingms.org/donate. Thank you for your support. Living Well with MS is produced by Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity. We are here to help inform, support and empower everyone affected by MS. To find out more and subscribe to our e-newsletter, please visit our website at overcomingms.org. Thanks again for tuning in and see you next time.